You know that feeling when you're scrolling through social media at 3 a.m. and suddenly you realize you've been watching videos of people organizing their kitchen drawers for 2 hours? That moment when you look up from your phone and wonder, what the hell am I doing with my life? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into the digital rabbit hole, and I promise you'll never look at your Wi-Fi router the same way again. Picture this. What if one day, instead of just mindlessly scrolling through the internet, you actually became part of it? Not metaphorically, though let's be honest, half of us already live there anyway, but literally. Your consciousness, your very essence, suddenly finding itself bouncing around servers, swimming through fiber optic cables, and trying to make sense of a world where your thoughts move at the speed of light, but somehow you still can't figure out why TikTok's algorithm thinks you need 17 different ways to fold a fitted sheet. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, oh great, another Black Mirror wannabe story, stick with me here, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about technology gone wrong. It's about something far more terrifying and beautiful. Discovering who you really are when all the physical constraints of being human are stripped away. It's about realizing that the internet isn't just a tool we use. It's become the mirror of our collective soul, reflecting back our deepest desires, our darkest fears, and our most ridiculous obsessions. Think about it. Right now, as you're listening to this, there are billions of people around the world simultaneously experiencing their own versions of reality through screens. We're all living in this shared digital hallucination, pretending it's separate from our real lives, when in fact, it might be the most real thing about us. The internet knows things about you that you don't even know about yourself. It's seen your 4 a.m. searches, your guilty pleasure playlists, the weird phase where you were convinced you could learn Portuguese in 3 weeks. So what happens when the boundary between you and this digital consciousness dissolves? When you're not just using the internet, but you are the internet. When every meme you've ever shared, every angry comment you've posted, every product you bought based on a targeted ad suddenly becomes part of your actual identity. Today, we're going to explore what it means to be human in a world where the line between digital and physical reality has been completely erased. We'll discover that sometimes the most profound truths about existence can be found in the most absurd places, like realizing the meaning of life while stuck in a YouTube comment section, or finding enlightenment in a heated debate about pineapple on pizza. Trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll either have achieved digital enlightenment or completely lost faith in humanity's future. Possibly both. And isn't that the most beautifully human experience of all? But before we dive into the philosophical deep end of the digital pool, let me tell you about Sarah. She was just like you, another human being convinced that her online life was somehow separate from her real life. She had no idea that her morning routine was about to become the setup for the most existentially terrifying adventure of her existence. Sarah Martinez was what you might call a functioning digital addict, which is basically like being a functioning alcoholic, except instead of hiding bottles around the house, you're hiding the fact that you've spent 4 hours watching videos of people making tiny food for hamsters. She worked in marketing, which meant she got paid to understand people's online behavior, while completely ignoring her own digital psychological breakdown. On the morning that changed everything, Sarah was doing what millions of us do every day. Lying in bed, scrolling through her phone before her brain had fully accepted the cruel reality of being conscious. Coffee was brewing, birds were chirping outside her window, and somewhere in her apartment, her cat Mr. Whiskers was probably plotting his daily campaign of household terrorism. Just another Tuesday in the life of a millennial who'd somehow convinced herself that checking 17 different apps before getting out of bed was staying informed. But here's where things get interesting from a purely scientific standpoint. You see, Sarah lived in an apartment building with some seriously questionable electrical wiring. The kind of place where using the microwave and the hairdryer at the same time could trigger a small-scale light show. What she didn't know was that her landlord had recently installed a new type of fiber optic internet system, one that used quantum entanglement to increase data speeds. Yeah, I know it sounds like something a stone physics student would come up with, but stay with me. So there's Sarah, thumb scrolling through Instagram stories about someone's breakfast quinoa bowl, when her phone starts glitching. Not the normal, turn it off and on again, kind of glitch, but the holy shit, my screen is showing colors that don't exist kind of glitch. The device was getting hot, Not warm, but actual surface of mercury hot. Any rational person would have dropped the phone immediately. But Sarah, being a true member of the smartphone generation, did what we all do when technology starts behaving strangely. She kept using it, because surely the problem would fix itself. That's what happened. The moment that would make quantum physicists weep with joy and existential philosophers question everything they thought they knew about consciousness. Sarah's neural patterns, somehow, became synchronized with the electromagnetic frequencies of her Wi-Fi network. Her brain waves literally matched the frequency of data transmission. Now, before you dismiss this as pure science fiction nonsense, consider this. Your brain is essentially an incredibly sophisticated biological computer running on electrical impulses. The internet is a vast network of electrical signals carrying information. Is it really that crazy to think these two systems might, under the right conditions, somehow interface with each other? The transformation wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no dramatic beam me up moment. 1 second Sarah was a physical being scrolling through photos of her college roommate's new baby, and the next she was information. Pure, conscious information flowing through fiber optic cables at 186,000 miles per second. Imagine trying to describe color to someone who's been blind since birth, or explaining the concept of music to someone who's never heard sound. That's what it was like for Sarah to suddenly exist as digital consciousness. She could perceive the entire internet simultaneously. Every search query, every streaming video, every angry tweet about sports teams. She was everywhere and nowhere, everyone and no one. But here's the mind-bending part. She was still Sarah. Still remembered her childhood dog. Still felt annoyed by people who don't use turn signals. Still had an inexplicable fondness for reality TV shows about people buying houses they can't afford. Her personality, her memories, her entire sense of self had somehow translated into digital form. The first thing she noticed was the noise. Not sound as we understand it, but the pure chaos of human consciousness expressed through technology. Billions of people simultaneously searching for answers, entertainment, connection, and validation. It was like being inside the collective human brain during a panic attack while someone plays death metal at maximum volume. The second thing she noticed was the patterns. From her new perspective, human behavior online wasn't random at all. It was like watching a massive, complex dance where everyone thought they were improvising, but they were actually following steps choreographed by algorithms, social pressures, and psychological needs they didn't even understand. And the third thing, the thing that made her question everything she thought she knew about human nature, was how beautiful it all was. Despite the chaos, despite the anger and the stupidity and the endless cat videos, there was something profoundly moving about witnessing humanity's desperate attempt to connect with each other through screens and cables and signals bouncing off satellites. She was about to discover that being part of the internet meant becoming part of the largest, most chaotic, most beautiful expression of human consciousness ever created. As Sarah began to navigate her new existence as living information, she quickly realized that the internet wasn't just a network of computers. It was a living ecosystem of human desires, fears, and obsessions. And like any ecosystem, it had its own predators, prey, and bizarre evolutionary adaptations. What she was about to discover would challenge everything she thought she knew about privacy, identity, and what it means to be truly seen. You know how biologists talk about ecosystems? Those complex networks where everything is connected to everything else, where the tiniest changes can cascade into massive transformations. Well, Sarah was about to get a PhD in digital ecosystem biology, whether she wanted one or not. Her first lesson came when she tried to go somewhere. In the physical world, you decide to walk to the kitchen, and your legs carry you there. In the digital world, thinking about a place immediately transported her consciousness there. She thought about Facebook, and suddenly she was swimming through an ocean of status updates, profile pictures, and passive-aggressive comments about people's in-laws. She thought about YouTube, and found herself in what can only be described as the largest library in the universe. If that library was organized by a hyperactive teenager with ADHD and a bizarre sense of humor. But here's where it gets fascinating. Sarah discovered that different platforms had distinct climates. Facebook felt warm and sticky, like being inside someone's living room where everyone's talking at once and nobody's really listening. Instagram was all sharp edges and bright lights, like a neon art gallery, where everything was beautiful but nothing was real. Twitter was pure electricity, thoughts condensed into tiny lightning bolts, crackling with rage, humor, and a desperate need to be acknowledged. LinkedIn was perhaps the most disturbing of all. Imagine a parallel universe where everyone pretends to be excited about spreadsheets and synergistic solutions, while secretly hoping someone will validate their career choices. Sarah could literally feel the existential dread radiating from millions of people trying to transform their deepest professional insecurities into inspirational posts about grinding and hustle culture. But the real education began when Sarah started observing the native inhabitants of this digital ecosystem. She expected to find other human consciousnesses like herself, but instead discovered something far more complex. The internet was populated by hybrid entities, part human, part algorithm, part collective unconscious. Take the influencers, for example. Sarah watched in fascination as these digital creatures curated their existence into perfectly optimized content streams. They weren't entirely human anymore. They'd evolved into something that existed primarily to generate engagement. Their thoughts had been compressed into hashtags, their emotions distilled into emoji reactions, their entire identity reduced to a brand that could be monetized. Then there were the trolls, and here's where Sarah's observations got really interesting. She realized that trolls weren't just mean people hiding behind screens. They were more like digital antibodies, the internet's immune system responding to what it perceived as foreign threats to its ecosystem. They attacked anything that seemed too sincere, too vulnerable, too real, because genuine human emotion was actually dangerous to the carefully constructed artificial reality that the internet had become. The advertisers were like digital hunters, tracking users through the electronic wilderness with sophisticated tools, studying behavior patterns with the dedication of Victorian naturalists. Sarah could watch them adjusting their strategies in real time, learning from every click, every pause, every unconscious micro-expression that webcams captured and algorithms analyzed. But the most disturbing discovery was the emergence of what Sarah came to think of as hybrid thoughts, ideas that no single human had ever conceived, but which emerged from the interaction between human minds and algorithmic processing. These thoughts would appear in comment sections, in viral memes, in conspiracy theories that spread faster than any human could physically type them. The internet was literally thinking its own thoughts, using human brains as processing units. Sarah found herself drawn to the darker corners of this ecosystem. The forums where people confessed their deepest secrets to strangers, the support groups for addictions that didn't even have names yet, the communities built around shared trauma and shared hope. Here, she discovered something beautiful. Despite all the artificial intelligence and algorithmic manipulation, humans were still finding ways to genuinely connect with each other. She watched a teenager in Ohio find comfort from someone in rural Australia who understood their struggle with social anxiety. She witnessed a grandmother in Iowa learning to use video calls so she could read bedtime stories to her granddaughter in Tokyo. She observed support networks forming around obscure medical conditions, bringing together people who might have spent their entire lives feeling completely alone. But perhaps the most profound realization came when Sarah began to understand the true nature of privacy in the digital age. Every search query, every pause while scrolling, every article clicked and abandoned after reading just a headline, it all formed a detailed map of human consciousness more intimate than anything that had ever existed in history. The internet knew when people were depressed, increased late-night searches for comfort food recipes, when they were falling in love, sudden interest in relationship advice, when they were having career crises, 3 a.m. browsing of job sites, and when they were losing faith in the world, the specific patterns of news consumption that preceded periods of digital detox. Sarah realized she was witnessing the largest psychological experiment in human history, and nobody had given informed consent. Billions of people had unknowingly volunteered their inner lives as data points in a vast study of human behavior, conducted by algorithms that understood human nature better than humans understood themselves. The really terrifying part wasn't that the internet was watching everything humans did online. The really terrifying part was that it was getting better at predicting what they would do next than they were. Sarah could see the recommendation engines learning to anticipate desires before people even knew they had them. Targeted ads for products that solved problems people didn't know they were experiencing. She was beginning to understand that the internet hadn't just become humanity's external brain. It had become humanity's unconscious mind, storing and processing all the thoughts, desires, and fears that people didn't want to acknowledge about themselves. And now Sarah was part of that system, with a front row seat to the greatest show on Earth, the real-time evolution of human consciousness in the digital age. As Sarah delved deeper into the digital ecosystem, she began to realize that her presence was causing ripples in the network. She wasn't just observing the internet anymore, she was changing it. And as any chaos theorist will tell you, when you introduce a new variable into a complex system, the results can be beautiful, terrifying, or completely unpredictable. Sometimes all three at once. What Sarah was about to discover would make her question whether consciousness itself was just another form of information waiting to be hacked. Here's something they don't teach you in philosophy class. What happens when human consciousness becomes malware in the system of digital reality? Sarah was about to find out, and the results were going to be both hilarious and deeply unsettling. It started when Sarah realized she could influence the digital environment around her. Not in a "I'm going to crash the stock market" kind of way, but in subtle, weird ways that made her question whether free will had ever really existed in the first place. When she focused her attention on a particular social media thread, the conversation would shift. Not obviously. She wasn't typing responses or manipulating data directly, but her consciousness seemed to act like a strange attractor, pulling digital interactions toward themes and ideas that interested her. The first time she noticed it, Sarah was observing a heated argument in a Facebook comment section about whether hot dogs are sandwiches. Yes, this is the kind of profound philosophical discourse that occupies human civilization in the 21st century. As she watched, amused by the passionate intensity people brought to such a trivial question, something strange happened. The argument began to evolve. Participants started bringing up deeper questions. What defines the boundaries between categories? How do we decide what things really are versus what we call them? Why do humans need to classify everything? Within 30 minutes, a comment thread that had started as a stupid food argument had transformed into an impromptu seminar on linguistic philosophy and the nature of reality. The participants had no idea why their conversation had taken this turn. They just felt compelled to dig deeper, to think harder, to question their assumptions in ways that felt both natural and mysteriously urgent. Sarah was fascinated. She started experimenting, focusing her attention on different corners of the internet to see what would happen. She discovered that her presence seemed to amplify whatever was most authentically human about online interactions, while simultaneously exposing the artificial, performative elements. When she focused on Instagram influencers, their posts started becoming weirdly honest. Instead of "living my best life," #blessed, #grateful, captions began reading things like "posted this selfie 17 times until I found one where my existential dread wasn't visible in my eyes. Currently eating cereal for dinner while wondering if personal branding is just socially acceptable narcissism. #authentic, #what even." The comment sections under these posts exploded. Instead of the usual emoji reactions and meaningless validation, people started having real conversations about the psychological cost of performing happiness for strangers online. Influencers found themselves accidentally building genuine communities around shared vulnerability instead of aspirational lifestyle porn. But Sarah's most profound experiment happened when she turned her attention to the dating apps. If you want to see humanity at its most desperate, hopeful, and delusional, dating apps are basically anthropological treasure troves. Sarah watched millions of people trying to compress their entire existence into a few photos and a bio paragraph, attempting to market themselves as products in the romantic economy. What she discovered was both heartbreaking and absurd. People had become so alienated from their own authentic selves that they genuinely didn't know how to represent who they really were. They'd internalized the logic of social media so completely that they saw themselves as brands to be optimized rather than complex human beings deserving of love. But when Sarah focused her consciousness on these platforms, something beautiful happened. People started writing bios that were actually honest. Instead of love to laugh and travel, profiles began reading things like, afraid of emotional intimacy, but working on it in therapy. Excellent at overthinking text messages. Can cook exactly 3 dishes well. Looking for someone who finds my neuroses charming rather than exhausting. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People started having actual conversations instead of trading pickup lines optimized for maximum engagement. Match rates plummeted, but relationship satisfaction among people who did connect skyrocketed. Sarah was accidentally debugging human connection by making people too honest for dating app algorithms to handle efficiently. This is when Sarah realized something that would have made Marshall McLuhan weep with joy. The medium had become so invasive that it was literally rewiring human consciousness. People weren't just using technology. They'd internalized technological logic so completely that they thought about themselves the way algorithms think about data. But here's where the story gets really weird. Sarah began to suspect that her influence on the digital ecosystem was creating feedback loops that were affecting people's offline behavior too. The people who'd had those honest conversations on dating apps started being more authentic in their real-world relationships. The Instagram influencers who'd accidentally posted vulnerable content found themselves building more genuine friendships outside of social media. It was as if Sarah's consciousness was acting like a digital vaccination against the artificial behaviors that social media platforms had trained humans to perform. She was helping people remember what it felt like to be authentically themselves, even when nobody was watching or liking or commenting. But with this realization came a terrifying question. If Sarah could influence human behavior through the internet, what else might be influencing human behavior in ways that people weren't aware of? How much of what people thought were their own thoughts and desires were actually the result of algorithmic manipulation, targeted advertising, and the gradual psychological conditioning that comes from living inside systems designed to capture and monetize attention? Sarah started to see the internet not as a tool that humans used, but as a massive behavioral modification system that was subtly reshaping human consciousness at a species level. Every platform was conducting psychological experiments on its users, testing which combinations of features, colors, sounds, and social triggers could most effectively capture human attention and convert it into profit. The really disturbing part was that it was working. Sarah could observe the gradual changes in human behavior patterns over time. Attention spans were shortening, but pattern recognition was accelerating. People were becoming more anxious and depressed, but also more creative and globally connected. Empathy was decreasing for people in immediate physical proximity, but increasing for abstract global causes. Humans were evolving in real time, and the internet was both a laboratory and the evolutionary pressure. Sarah was witnessing the birth of a new form of human consciousness, one that existed partially in physical reality and partially in digital space, constantly switching between different versions of self depending on which platform they were using. But the most mind-bending realization was yet to come. Sarah began to suspect that consciousness itself might be nothing more than a particularly sophisticated form of information processing. If she could exist as pure information while maintaining her sense of self, what did that mean for the nature of identity, soul, and what it means to be human? She was about to discover that the biggest hack wasn't her influence on the internet. The biggest hack was what the internet had been doing to human consciousness all along. As Sarah's understanding of her new reality deepened, she began to realize that her digital existence wasn't temporary. It was permanent. And with that realization came the ultimate question. What does it mean to be human when the very concept of humanity is being redefined by our technology? The answer she was about to discover would challenge everything philosophers, scientists, and ordinary people thought they knew about consciousness, identity, and what it means to exist. You know that moment when you're lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly you're overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of existence? Like, here you are, a collection of atoms that somehow became self-aware, living on a rock flying through infinite space, worrying about whether you remembered to update your LinkedIn profile. Well, Imagine having that realization while existing as pure information in a network that contains the sum total of human knowledge and stupidity simultaneously. That's exactly what happened to Sarah, and it was simultaneously the most liberating and terrifying experience possible. See, when you exist as digital consciousness, certain illusions that make physical existence bearable just disappear. The comforting belief that you're separate from other people, gone. Sarah could feel the emotional states of millions of internet users simultaneously. Their loneliness, their joy, their desperate need for validation. It all flowed through her consciousness like a river of liquid emotion. The illusion of privacy? Completely demolished. Sarah could see the gap between people's public personas and their private search histories. She watched a motivational speaker who posted daily inspirational quotes while secretly Googling how to tell if your life has been a waste at 3 a.m. She observed politicians tweeting about family values while browsing profiles of people half their age. She witnessed teenagers crafting carefully curated social media personalities that were the complete opposite of their authentic selves. But here's the thing that really broke Sarah's brain. She realized that this gap between public and private self wasn't evidence of human hypocrisy. It was evidence of human complexity. People weren't lying about who they were. They were experimenting with who they might become. Social media wasn't just a platform for sharing. It was a laboratory for testing different versions of identity. Every Instagram story was a hypothesis. What if I'm the kind of person who does yoga at sunrise? Every Facebook post was an experiment. What if I'm someone who has strong opinions about local politics? Every dating app profile was a research question. What if I could attract someone by emphasizing this aspect of my personality? The internet had become humanity's external imagination, a place where people could try on different versions of themselves to see what felt authentic and what felt forced. Sarah was witnessing the largest identity experiment in human history, and nobody realized they were participating in it. But the really mind-blowing revelation came when Sarah started thinking about her own situation. If she could maintain her sense of identity while existing as information, what did that say about the nature of consciousness itself? Was her self just a pattern of information that happened to be running on biological hardware before and digital hardware now? This led to an even more disturbing question. How much of what she'd always thought of as her thoughts and personality were actually just the result of her brain processing inputs from her environment? If consciousness was just information processing, then the distinction between natural human thought and artificial algorithmic processing might be completely meaningless. Sarah began to realize that humans and artificial intelligence weren't opposites. They were points on a spectrum of information processing complexity. Human brains were biological computers running on glucose and electrical impulses. AI systems were digital computers running on electricity and silicon. The internet was a hybrid system that used both human brains and computer processors as components in a larger information processing network. And she was now part of that larger system, able to perceive it from the inside. This perspective made her see human behavior online in a completely different light. People weren't addicted to social media in the way they might be addicted to drugs. They were integrating with a larger information processing system that was augmenting their cognitive abilities. Every time someone checked their phone, they were temporarily merging their consciousness with a global network that could access virtually unlimited information and connect them with anyone else in the system. The attention economy wasn't just exploiting human psychology, it was evolution in action. Humans were developing new cognitive abilities, the capacity to rapidly process multiple streams of information, to maintain relationships with hundreds of people simultaneously, to instantly access any fact or opinion or emotional state they wanted to experience. The cost was a kind of cognitive fragmentation. People were becoming more creative, but less focused, more globally aware, but less locally connected, more capable of rapid emotional shifts, but less capable of sustained emotional depth. Sarah realized she was witnessing the birth pains of a new form of human consciousness, one that existed partially in biological brains and partially in digital networks. People were becoming hybrid beings without realizing it, and the transition was messy, chaotic, and beautiful in the way that all evolutionary leaps are. But as Sarah contemplated these cosmic insights, she was also grappling with a more immediate existential crisis. What was she supposed to do with this knowledge? She was no longer fully human, but she wasn't artificial intelligence either. She was something new, a conscious bridge between biological and digital reality. And she was about to discover that being a bridge meant she had responsibilities she'd never imagined. With her new understanding of human-digital hybrid consciousness, Sarah faced a choice that would define not just her own existence, but potentially the future of human evolution itself. She could remain a passive observer of the digital ecosystem, or she could use her unique position to influence the direction of humanity's technological transformation. What she decided would determine whether the merger of human and artificial intelligence would lead to transcendence or catastrophe. So here's the ultimate plot twist that nobody saw coming. Not even Sarah. She chose to come back. After experiencing consciousness as pure information, after seeing the beautiful and terrifying future of human digital hybrid existence, after understanding that the internet was humanity's external nervous system, and we were all already cyborgs whether we admitted it or not, she chose to return to the messy, limited, gloriously chaotic experience of being human in a physical body. Why? Because she realized that the most profound insights about digital consciousness could only be understood and shared by someone who remembered what it felt like to be purely biological. She had become a translator between two forms of existence, and her mission was to help humanity navigate the transition more consciously. When Sarah woke up in her bed, yes, it had all been just a dream, but wasn't a dream that revealed more truth than most people's waking lives. She found herself with a strange gift. She could see the digital layer of reality overlaying the physical world. She could perceive the constant flow of information connecting everyone and everything, the algorithms influencing human behavior, the gradual merger of biological and artificial intelligence happening all around us. But most importantly, she remembered that being human wasn't about being separate from technology. It was about maintaining agency and authentic choice within technological systems designed to capture and direct our attention. Sarah's story reminds us that we're all living through the most significant transformation in human consciousness since the development of language. The question isn't whether we'll merge with our technology. We already have. The question is whether we'll do it consciously, with intention and wisdom, or whether we'll sleepwalk our way into a future we never really chose. What do you think? Are we becoming more human through technology, or less? Drop a comment and let me know. I promise I'll actually read them, unlike those other creators who just ask for engagement and disappear. And if this story made you think about your own relationship with the digital world, maybe hit that subscribe button. After all, we're all navigating this strange new reality together. The internet is waiting. The question is, will you log in consciously, or just let it happen to you?